Horror in the Forest is generally a good film. It absolutely does not deserve the low rating it has on IMDb. At the moment, it's got 3.6 out of 10, although that is only across 198 reviews and ratings, so it's not the largest pool of opinions. But if you have considered watching it, it's currently on Amazon, and you've been put off by that rating or, low ratings anywhere else, give it a go. I enjoyed it. It slowed down quite a bit, kind of from the halfway point until towards the end, but then it picked up again. However, I will say I feel like we needed an extra 2 minutes at the end, but I'll discuss with a spoiler warning what I needed to see at the end to feel satisfied and why it didn't quite leave me feeling satisfied with everything. But for the most part, this won't contain any spoilers. This was released this year in 2023, directed by Brendan Rudnicki, written by Rudnicki and Kellan Rudnicki. And this is about three people who are making a documentary in this forest where children have been disappearing. And they've been disappearing because of, allegedly, this witch. And of course, they're there to find out what has happened. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of horror films set in forests because I find they're all very similar and very repetitive, but this one threw up a few things that I hadn't predicted. Not that much, but enough that I thought it would be worth watching. And while they're there, they meet a father whose daughter went missing, and he agrees, kind of reluctantly, but ultimately agrees to talk for the documentary and then go into the forest with them. And I won't say any more than that, but I will say it is quite scary. I'm not the biggest fan of jump scares, but actually the jump scares in this were perfectly executed. Very, very well done. And I have to give it praise. The bits that were scary were very effective. The whole thing is about an hour and 20 minutes, and I didn't time it, I didn't write down the specific times, but I'd say roughly the first half an hour was really great, really compelling. And then it slowed down for about another half an hour and not much happened, and it definitely wasn't scary. There's hardly any horror or scary elements for a good half an hour in the middle, and I did think, will I bother carrying on with this? I tend to not ever give up with a film because unless there's a reason for it, I tend to keep going until the end, and I'm glad I did because it picked back up, and the direction it took was not at all what I was expecting. So if you've started watching it, and you gave up when it stopped being scary and really stopped being interesting, my recommendation would be to go back and at least see it through until the end, because I think it's worth it. It's not perfect, but I certainly am glad that I stuck with it. The acting's absolutely fine, the sound effects are fine, the camera works fine. Not the biggest fan, as I said, of this kind of shaky cam, handheld, woods-based footage, because once you've seen one, you've seen them all, and that's generally true, and for the most part this is the same. But there are a couple of things here and there that I think make it a little bit different to at least other films like this that I've seen. Definitely worth checking out if you're looking for a film that's quite scary. Not that difficult to watch either. It doesn't take too much concentration. It's not one that's got a really complex, overly complicated narrative. What you see is what you get. It's pretty straightforward, but not completely predictable. So credit where it's due. I think the narrative itself worked quite fine. It just needed to be a little bit scarier for about half an hour, maybe a little bit longer. So spoiler from now, I'm going to discuss the ending, but not in any great detail. But I just want to explain what I personally needed to see at the end. It was something I was expecting, so when it didn't happen, I was quite surprised. So at the end, big spoilers, as I said, we see the feet being dragged away, we know what's happened. I then needed to see the father and his daughter walking away. I needed to see that the father had been right with the ritual, and that he had exchanged one person for another, quite simply. And you'll notice I'm not using character names because I can't remember. I actually feel like I never built up a connection with any of the characters in this at all. But at the same time, I feel like they weren't that interesting. I was more interested in what was in front of the camera. And interestingly, most of them don't even have names on IMDb. The characters their names aren't listed on IMDb, so I can't even check there, as I have just done. So that's why I'm not naming names, because I can't even remember them, and they're not on IMDb. Read into that what you will. But at the end, the feet are dragged away. There is, at least I assume, that the ritual has worked, that the father has exchanged the female of the documentary crew for his daughter. And I needed that. I needed to see that. I needed to see the father walking away with the daughter, because we see her, we see the daughter. So it's very clear that there's the connection. But I needed to see that moment of satisfaction where the father's ritual has worked and he gets the daughter and they go off, and their story continues, and obviously we can see what's happened to the documentary crew. And it would have taken 3 seconds to show us that, and it would have been so much more satisfying. Maybe they didn't because they wanted us to make up our own minds about what we thought happened. But personally, I wanted them to show me that that's what had happened. But it wasn't enough to spoil the ending, but I was so certain that that's what was going to happen because we'd just seen the girl. And she was clearly leading the female documentary maker down that path. So it's not really like it was up to our imagination to work out what had happened. And genuinely, we saw the feet being dragged away. And I was so confident the next clip would be the girl and her father, and it wasn't, and I was a little bit disappointed. I feel like it was a missed opportunity because it's that false happy ending where it's not actually a happy ending, even though some people have got what they wanted. So ultimately, I liked it. It's not an amazing film. It's not completely terrifying all of the way through, but the scary moments are good. Not the biggest fan of jump scares, but in this film they worked really well. I hope by this point you have seen the film, because I have kind of ruined the ending. But if you haven't, and you don't mind the fact I've ruined the ending, give it a go. I think it's a nice film to watch if you want something that's quite scary, but not too challenging to watch. And it's one that I probably would never watch again. I don't tend to watch this kind of film more than once, but I enjoyed the time. I enjoyed the time I spent watching it, and I'm happy to recommend it. It's definitely not as bad as what some of the reviews make it seem. I think it's worth watching at least once.